So, let's go. Number 1. The disease called Yaws. In a village in Papua New Guinea, a child sits with one open sore on his shin, round and raised, and roughly the color of a raspberry. A health worker holds up a single white pill. That one dose should be enough to erase this disease from the earth. It has almost happened twice, and twice it has slipped away. Yaws is the returning killer that keeps teaching us the same lesson. Nearly finishing is not the same as finishing. The bacterium behind it is a spirochete called Treponema pallidum pertinu. It is a near twin of the germ that causes syphilis, sharing more than 99.8% of its genetic code. It belongs to a small family of diseases called the Treponematoses, alongside syphilis, Bejel, and Pinta. The scars of these infections show up deep in the human past. Archaeologists have found treponemal lesions eaten into ancient bone, and some researchers have traced signs of the family back through hundreds of thousands of years of hominin remains. But Yaws is not passed the way syphilis is. It spreads through simple skin-to-skin contact between children in warm, wet, rural places. It begins with a single lesion the French named after the raspberry framboise. Left alone for years, it can move into the bones, the cartilage, and the face, hollowing out features in a late-stage doctors called gangosa. Here is why Yaws is on this list. Between 1952 and 1964, the World Health Organization and UNICEF ran one of the most ambitious disease campaigns ever attempted. They treated around 300 million people across 46 countries with penicillin. Global cases fell by roughly 95%. And then the campaign wound down before the job was done. The last pockets survived, and Yaws crept back across the tropics. In 2012, a physician named Oriol Mitja ran a trial in Papua New Guinea and showed that a single oral dose of azithromycin worked as well as an injection of penicillin. That discovery launched a new eradication push. India was certified free of Yaws in 2016, but the original target of 2020 came and went, and 13 to 15 countries remain endemic today, from Ghana to the Solomon Islands. Then came the twist scientists feared most. In 2018, after mass treatment, azithromycin-resistant strains were detected in Papua New Guinea, threatening the one cheap tool that made eradication possible. Yaws has no confirmed animal reservoir, which is exactly why it should be beatable. Mainstream researchers blame funding and complacency. Historians point at how the old campaigns were designed to stop early. A speculative minority wonders about a hidden reservoir in primates. Whatever the cause, a disease we scrubbed from 300 million people is back, because we quit one step short. And that is the template for almost everything else on this list. Number 2. Scrub typhus. Picture a soldier in the Burmese jungle in 1944. He has a black scab the size of a coin where something bit him, and a fever climbing past anything the field doctors can name. He is one of thousands. In the Pacific and Burma campaigns of the Second World War, this disease took soldiers off the line as effectively as bullets. The cause is a bacterium called Orientia tsutsugamushi. It was once filed under Rickettsia, but in 1995 it was reclassified into its own genus. It is carried by the larvae of tiny mites called chiggers in the genus Leptospirosis. The mites are not just the vector, they are the reservoir. Infected females pass the bacterium down to their own offspring, so the disease persists in the mites themselves, with no need for a sick animal to keep it alive. The Japanese name tells you how old this is. Tsutsuga means illness or danger, and mushi means insect. For centuries, this was a fever of river valleys. Its signature is that black scab, called an ajar, along with fever and rash. For a long time, it stayed inside a region scientists nicknamed the Tsutsugamushi Triangle, a vast zone of about 13 million square kilometers, running from Far East Russia and Japan down to northern Australia and west toward Afghanistan. More than 1 billion people live inside it. Around 1 million cases occur every year, and untreated, the death rate can climb toward 30%. Now, here is where the story turns. That triangle is breaking. In 2006, cases turned up in Chile, on Chiloé Island, thousands of kilometers from any known focus. Scrub typhus has since been confirmed in the Middle East and parts of Africa. A disease that stayed boxed in one corner of the world for centuries is suddenly appearing on new continents, and researchers are still arguing about how it got there. Doxycycline and azithromycin remain the treatments, and there is still no vaccine, because the strains are so wildly diverse. Worse, reduced susceptibility to doxycycline has already been reported in northern Thailand. The drivers of the spread read like a list of everything changing about the modern world. Deforestation and farming push people into so-called mite islands, dense patches of scrub where infected larvae concentrate. A warming climate lets the mites climb into higher latitudes and altitudes they could never survive before. Mainstream science credits climate and land use change. Ecologists emphasize the expansion of those mite islands. A more speculative view holds that these new foci were always there, just never diagnosed, because scrub typhus is endlessly confused with dengue, malaria, and the next disease on our list. Either way, the danger zone is no longer a triangle you can draw on a map. It is widening, and the ground itself carries the next threat. Number 3. Histoplasmosis. A group of cavers crawls through a Midwestern cave floor thick with bat guano. A week later, several of them cannot catch their breath. What they have inhaled is not dust. It is the spores of a fungus that will bloom inside their lungs. That fungus is Histoplasma capsulatum. It leads a double life. In cool soil, it grows as a mold. At body temperature, it transforms into a yeast. It was first described in 1906 by Samuel Taylor Darling, working in the Panama Canal Zone, which is why it is still sometimes called Darling's disease. Darling mistook the organism for a parasite resembling Leishmania and gave it the species name Capsulatum, believing it had a capsule. It does not. The name is a 200-year-old error frozen into the textbooks. The fungus thrives in soil enriched by bird and bat droppings, especially in caves, old chicken coops, and roosts. Cavers who caught it gave it a folk name, cave disease, or spelunker's lung. For most of the 20th century, American doctors learned a simple rule. Histoplasmosis lived in the Ohio and Mississippi River valleys, and nowhere much else. That map turned out to be wrong. In 2021, a research team led by Andre Speck published a study that shattered the old boundaries. They found meaningful numbers of histoplasmosis cases in 94% of United States states, far outside the classic valleys. The disease had quietly gone nearly nationwide, while the textbooks still drew it inside 2 rivers. Most infections are mild or silent, but a heavy dose, or a weakened immune system, can send the fungus spreading through the whole body. In people with advanced HIV, disseminated histoplasmosis is a major and frequently fatal infection, especially across Latin America. Outbreaks have followed construction, demolition, and cave tourism, anything that kicks contaminated soil into the air. In the 1970s, an outbreak in Indianapolis, tied to urban renewal disturbing the ground, is estimated to have exposed around 100,000 people. Serious cases are treated with antifungals like itraconazole, and for the worst disease, amphotericin B. But the range keeps growing. In 2019, cases surfaced in Alberta, Canada, in territory long considered too cold. In 2022, the World Health Organization put histoplasma on its first ever list of priority fungal pathogens, a formal admission that this is a rising global threat. Mainstream researchers point to a warming, wetter climate, plus better detection. Ecologists focus on shifting bird and bat habitats, carrying the fungus into new soil. A more speculative view says histoplasmosis was always more widespread than the map claimed. hidden behind decades of misdiagnosis as tuberculosis or cancer. What is not in doubt is the shape of the threat. A fungus that lives in ordinary dirt is expanding under a warming sky, and it does not need us to be sick to be everywhere. And where soil carries this one, water carries the next. Number 4. Leptospirosis. After a monsoon flood, a rice farmer wades home through brown, waist-deep water. He notices nothing. 10 days later, his kidneys are failing, and his skin has turned yellow. He has been poisoned by something invisible carried in the water, shed from the bladder of a rat that was never sick at all. The culprits are corkscrew-shaped bacteria of the genus Leptospira, with more than 300 varieties, called serovars. This is one of the most widespread animal-borne diseases on the planet, found on every continent except Antarctica. The organism was first spotted in 1907 by Arthur Stimson, who saw the spirochetes in the kidney of a patient thought to have yellow fever. The severe form carries its own name, Weil's disease, after Adolf Weil, who described it in 1886 as a brutal combination of jaundice, kidney failure, and internal bleeding. The reservoir is rodents, above all rats. They carry Leptospira in their kidneys and shed it in their urine, often for life, without falling ill. Humans pick it up through contact with water or soil fouled by that urine, through cuts, through the eyes and mouth, or through skin left soft by long soaking. The World Health Organization estimates roughly 1 million severe human cases and nearly 60,000 deaths every year. This is, above all, a disease of floods. Heavy rain washes rodent urine into the water people cannot avoid walking through. Outbreaks spike after hurricanes and monsoons, documented again and again in the Philippines, in India, and across Central America. It even struck a wave of adventure race athletes who swam through contaminated freshwater and came home sick. The bacterium is patient. In warm, moist, neutral soil, it can survive for weeks or months, waiting. Here the modern world tips the scales in the disease's favor. Every projection of climate change points toward more extreme rainfall and more flooding, exactly the conditions Leptospira needs, and warmer water lets it survive longer. Meanwhile, crowded urban slums with poor drainage and dense rat populations have become permanent hotspots. Albert Coe and his colleagues trace this in the favelas of Brazil, where each rainy season brings a fresh surge. The illness can masquerade as a mild flu or explode into multi-organ failure, and its two-phase course fools doctors. It is regularly mistaken for dengue and malaria. Treatment with penicillin or doxycycline works best when it starts early, and there is no widely used human vaccine. Mainstream science ties the rising threat to climate and flooding. Urban ecologists blame slum rat densities. A more speculative strand watches for shifts in which serovars dominate. The common thread is simple and grim. Every worse flood season hands one of humanity's oldest waterborne killers a larger stage. And some ancient killers are returning not stronger, but simply beyond the reach of our medicine. Number 5. Drug-resistant Shigella, the cause of dysentery. In a crowded camp, a toddler is sick with dysentery, bloody and relentless, and the antibiotics that should stop it do nothing at all. This is not a scene from the past. It is a preview of the future, and it is already here. The bacteria are named for Kiyoshi Shiga, the Japanese microbiologist who identified Shigella dysenteriae during a devastating epidemic in 1897. There are 4 species, and together they cause bacillary dysentery, a bloody, mucus-filled diarrhea. What makes Shigella so dangerous is how little of it you need. As few as 10 to 100 organisms can start an infection, which is why it tears through crowded places with poor sanitation. Dysentery has walked beside humanity since antiquity. Chroniclers called it the bloody flux, and it destroyed armies and besieged cities more reliably than any general. Today, it still kills, with estimates of hundreds of thousands of deaths every year, most of them children under 5. One strain produces Shiga toxin, which can trigger kidney failure. It spreads by the fecal-oral route, through food, water, hands, and flies. Now here is the pivot that changes everything. For decades, dysentery was a solved problem in the wealthy world. You took an antibiotic, and you recovered. But Shigella has climbed a ladder of resistance, defeating one drug after another. First ampicillin, then the combination drug cotrimoxazole, then the fluoroquinolones like ciprofloxacin. In 2023, the United States Centers for Disease Control issued a formal advisory about extensively drug-resistant Shigella, meaning strains resistant to essentially all the recommended antibiotics. In the United States, such strains went from 0% of cases in 2015 to about 5% in 2022. Much of that spread has been among adults, including travelers, rather than only young children. The resistance genes ride on mobile loops of DNA called plasmids, which can jump between different gut bacteria, spreading the problem faster than any single microbe could. The World Health Organization lists resistant Shigella among the pathogens most urgently in need of new antibiotics. There is no licensed vaccine, even though, genetically, Shigella is almost indistinguishable from an invasive form of ordinary E. coli. Mainstream science blames the global overuse of antibiotics. Microbiologists focus on the ecology of those resistant plasmids. A more sweeping view treats extensively drug-resistant Shigella as a live preview of a post-antibiotic world, where a routine childhood illness becomes a death sentence again. The tools of rehydration still work, but the antibiotics that once guaranteed a cure are failing one by one. And that raises the strangest possibility of all. Sometimes the biggest returning threat is one we were sure we had already beaten. Number 6. Mpox, once called Monkeypox. In 1980, the world held a celebration unlike any in medical history. Smallpox, the greatest killer our species had ever faced, was declared eradicated. Routine vaccinations stopped, and in that moment of triumph, without anyone noticing, a door quietly swung open. Mpox is caused by the monkeypox virus, a member of the orthopox virus family, a close cousin of variola, the smallpox virus, and of vaccinia, the virus used in the smallpox vaccine. It was renamed Mpox by the World Health Organization in 2022 to reduce stigma. It was first found in 1958 in laboratory monkeys in Copenhagen, though the true reservoir is almost certainly African rodents. The first human case was recorded in 1970 in a 9-month-old boy in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. There are 2 genetic branches. Clade 1 from Central Africa has historically been the more severe, with reported death rates as high as around 10% in some outbreaks. Clade 2 from West Africa is milder, and it was a member of that branch that drove the global outbreak of 2022. Now hold on to the reason this virus is rising. The smallpox vaccine did not only protect against smallpox. Because the viruses are so closely related, it was roughly 85% effective against Mpox as well. When vaccination ended in 1980, that shield began to corrode. Every year since has added another cohort of humans with no orthopox immunity at all. The researcher Anne Rimoine documented the result directly, a 20-fold rise in human Mpox in the Democratic Republic of the Congo between the 1980s and the 2000s, tracking the fading of smallpox immunity. Then the virus went global. In 2022, it spread to more than 100 countries and produced tens of thousands of cases. In 2024, the World Health Organization declared a new international emergency over a more transmissible strain called Clade 1b, spreading through Central Africa. The virus is not standing still. Genomic surveillance shows it accumulating mutations consistent with sustained human-to-human spread, a shift away from its old pattern of rare jumps from animals. We are not defenseless. Vaccines built against smallpox, like the modified vaccinia Ankara shot, are being deployed, and antivirals like tecovirimat, designed as a smallpox countermeasure, are in trials. But the underlying trend is relentless. Mainstream science ties the rise directly to waning smallpox immunity. Evolutionary biologists watch the virus adapting to human hosts. A more speculative view warns of further clades yet to emerge. Public health scientists have a phrase for this. They call it spending down the eradication dividend. Our greatest victory left a door ajar, and Mpox is the first thing walking through it. The next returning threat is not even alive. Number 7. Mad cow disease in its human form, variant Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. A British teenager in the 1990s begins to forget how to walk. Her balance goes, then her memory, then her mind. Inside her skull, her brain is slowly turning to sponge, riddled with microscopic holes. She ate a hamburger years ago. That is all it took. The agent behind this is not a bacterium or a virus. It is a prion, a normal protein in the body that has folded into the wrong shape and gained a terrible power. It converts healthy neighboring proteins into copies of its own twisted form, a chain reaction with no cure and no end. The concept came from Stanley Prusiner, who coined the term prion in 1982 and won the Nobel Prize in 1997 for the idea. Bovine spongiform encephalopathy, mad cow disease, was first identified in British cattle in 1986. It spread through cattle feed made from the ground-up remains of other infected animals, effectively turning herbivores into unwilling cannibals. The British epidemic peaked in 1992 to 1993, and more than 180,000 cattle were ultimately infected. Then, in 1996, the government announced the news a nation had dreaded, a probable link between the cattle disease and a new, invariably fatal human illness, variant Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. The early forecasts imagined a catastrophe. The reality so far has been smaller and stranger. Around 178 people in Britain and roughly 230 worldwide have died of it. Authorities slaughtered more than 4 million cattle and banned the deadly feed, and the epidemic was brought under control. But here's the anomaly that keeps prion scientists awake. Prions are almost indestructible. They resist standard sterilization, cooking, radiation, and the chemicals that kill every germ. And the disease can incubate for decades before symptoms appear. In 2013, a British survey of stored appendix tissue estimated that roughly 1 in 2,000 people in the country might silently carry the abnormal prion with no symptoms at all. Early victims all shared one genetic profile at a spot called codon 129. Then, in 2016, a case appeared in a person with a different genotype, raising the fear of a possible second wave, arriving on a slower clock. There is no treatment and no vaccine. Prions cannot be cleared from the body, and instruments exposed to them need special decontamination because normal methods fail. Related prion diseases add to the worry, including chronic wasting disease, now spreading through North American deer and elk, which scientists watch nervously for any jump to humans. Mainstream opinion holds that the epidemic is over. Others study that hidden reservoir of silent carriers. A more speculative camp watches chronic wasting disease and that second genotype. Thousands of people may be quietly incubating an untreatable brain disease with no way to know. And from a fear born in a laboratory, we return to one born in ancient water. Number 8. Typhoid fever in its extensively drug-resistant form. In Sindh province, Pakistan, in 2016, doctors met a fever that laughed off their medicine. It shrugged aside 5 separate classes of antibiotics, one after another. This was typhoid, one of the oldest killers in the human story, reinvented as something close to untreatable. The cause is a bacterium, Salmonella enterica cerevar typhi. It lives only in humans, with no animal reservoir. which will matter later. It should not be confused with typhus, a completely different disease. Both names come from the Greek word typhos, meaning a stupor or smoke, the mental fog of the fever. Typhoid has haunted us since antiquity. When researchers analyzed DNA from a mass grave in 2006, some argued the plague of Athens, in 430 BCE, may have involved typhoid. It spreads through the fecal-oral route, in water and food fouled by an infected person, or by a carrier. The most famous carrier of all was Mary Mallon, remembered as Typhoid Mary, a cook who infected dozens across early 1900s New York while feeling perfectly well herself. Today, typhoid still causes an estimated 9 million cases and more than 100,000 deaths a year, concentrated in South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. Untreated, it can perforate the intestine, and historically it killed something like 10 to 20% of its victims. The arrival of chloramphenicol in 1948 turned typhoid from a mass killer into a treatable illness. And then, decade by decade, the bacterium climbed back. It defeated chloramphenicol, then became multi-drug resistant, then beat the fluoroquinolones. The extensively drug-resistant strain that surfaced in Sind in 2016, part of a lineage called H58, resisted 5 drug classes at once, leaving azithromycin and the intravenous carbapenems as nearly the last options standing. Genomic detectives, including Catherine Holt and Gordon Dugan, traced how that H58 lineage carried its resistance across national borders. An azithromycin resistance has now begun to appear, raising the specter of pan-resistant typhoid. But this story has a genuine weapon in it. A typhoid conjugate vaccine was pre-qualified by the World Health Organization in 2018, and Pakistan, facing its resistant outbreak, became the first country to add it to routine childhood immunization in 2019. Because typhi lives only in us, typhoid is, in theory, eradicable, like smallpox. Chronic carriers, though, keep the bacterium hidden in the gallbladder, sometimes for years. Mainstream science blames antibiotic overuse and failing water systems. Genomic researchers track the spread of that resistant lineage. A more speculative view braces for a pan-resistant future. A disease that sanitation and antibiotics had pushed to the margins is returning in a form that now races the very vaccine meant to stop it. And some returning killers are not just resisting our drugs. They are rewriting themselves to be deadlier. Number 9. Scarlet Fever. In a Victorian nursery, a fever moves through the children like a shadow, and the household empties. They called it the strangling angel of children. Then, picture a London clinic in 2016, where doctors watched that same fever climb to a 50-year high, as if the 19th century had come back to collect. Scarlet fever is caused by Streptococcus pyogenes, the group A Streptococcus, when the strain carries genes for toxins that produce the disease's vivid rash. Those toxin genes are often delivered by bacteriophages, viruses that infect the bacterium and hand it new weapons. The signs are a sore throat, a high fever, a fine rash rough as sandpaper, and a swollen, bright red strawberry tongue. In the 1800s and early 1900s, scarlet fever was one of the leading causes of childhood death across Europe and North America. Then, oddly, it began to fade in severity, partly before antibiotics even existed, for reasons still debated. The arrival of penicillin in the 1940s finished the job, and scarlet fever slipped out of the public sphere. Now, here is the turn no one predicted. Around 2011, the disease came roaring back. England recorded a surge to a 50-year high, with more than 30,000 cases in 2016. At the same time, East Asia was hit by parallel waves in Hong Kong, mainland China, South Korea, and Vietnam. Researchers including Mark Walker traced these surges to new toxin-carrying strains. In 2019, they described a lineage called M1 UK, which pumps out far more of a key toxin than older strains, making it more potent. The same bacterium has a darker face. In its invasive form, it causes necrotizing fasciitis, the so-called flesh-eating disease, and streptococcal toxic shock. In late 2022, a severe wave of invasive group A strep swept the United Kingdom and other countries, and children died. Remarkably, the bacterium remains fully susceptible to penicillin, with no confirmed resistance, though resistance to the backup macrolide drugs is climbing. There is still no vaccine after more than a century of trying, blocked by strain diversity and by fears of autoimmune side effects. Globally, Group A strep diseases, including the heart damage of rheumatic fever, cause more than 500,000 deaths a year. Mainstream science pins the resurgence on the evolution of new, more virulent clones. Immunologists add the idea of immunity debt, the drop in strep circulation during pandemic lockdowns, leaving a population primed for a rebound. A more speculative strand watches the phages that keep rewriting the toxins. The lesson is unsettling. This is not resistance to our drugs. This is an old bacterium reinventing itself into deadlier forms, while we still have nothing to vaccinate against it. And some returns are engineered, unintentionally, by our own success. Number 10. Mumps. A college sophomore wakes with his jaw swollen nearly shut, his face puffed out like a chipmunk's. He is fully vaccinated. He did everything right. And he is one of dozens in an outbreak sweeping his campus. That single scene captures the strange modern return of mumps. Mumps is caused by a paramyxovirus in the same family as measles. It is one of the oldest, clearly documented illnesses in history. Hippocrates described it in the 5th century BCE, noting the swelling near the ears and, in some men, the testicles. That swelling, called parotitis, comes from inflammation of the salivary glands, and it is the disease's calling card. It spreads through droplets and saliva, and before vaccines, nearly every child caught it. Mumps is not always gentle. It can cause orchitis, painful inflammation of the testicles that occasionally leads to infertility, along with deafness, pancreatitis, and inflammation of the brain and its lining. Before vaccination, it was a leading cause of acquired deafness in children and of viral meningitis. The vaccine has a famous origin. In 1963, Maurice Hilleman isolated the virus from his own daughter, Gerald Lynn, and the strain named after her is still used around the world today. Mumps became the middle letter of the MMR vaccine, introduced in 1971, and cases in the United States fell by more than 99%. And yet, here is the paradox at the heart of this one. Despite high vaccination, the outbreaks came back. A large cluster hit the American Midwest in 2006, with around 6,500 cases. Another struck New York in 2009 and 2010. From 2016 onward, the United States has seen thousands of cases a year, many on college campuses, and many among the fully vaccinated. The core reason is waning immunity. Protection from 2 MMR doses fades over the years, and the vaccine is only about 88% effective against mumps, lower than its near-perfect protection against measles. So a decade or more after their shots, young adults become vulnerable again, and crowded dormitories and sports teams do the rest. The response has been to recommend a 3rd MMR dose during outbreaks. Some researchers also ask whether differences between the vaccine strain and circulating wild strains play a role. Mainstream science emphasizes waning immunity. Others explore that strain mismatch. A more speculative view warns that falling vaccination from hesitancy will compound the problem. Mumps has no animal reservoir and a single serotype, which should make it eradicable. Instead, it demonstrates something uncomfortable. Even a disease controlled by 99% can quietly circulate again, as protection fades from an entire generation. And sometimes, cleanliness itself sets the trap. Number 11. Hepatitis A. At a restaurant in 2003, a plate of raw green onions looks like nothing at all. Those onions would seed one of the worst foodborne hepatitis outbreaks in American history, sickening more than 600 people and killing several. The vehicle was ordinary produce. The passenger was a virus that has shadowed humanity for thousands of years. Hepatitis A is caused by a small, tough RNA virus, a picornavirus. It spreads by the fecal-oral route, through contaminated food and water and close personal contact, and it is extraordinarily durable, able to survive for months in the environment and to shrug off freezing and drying. Jaundice-causing epidemic hepatitis has been described since antiquity, trailing armies and crowds wherever sanitation failed. Unlike hepatitis B and C, hepatitis A never becomes chronic, but the acute illness can be severe, and in rare cases, it kills. Now here's the counterintuitive turn that puts this disease on the list. In places with excellent sanitation, children almost never encounter the virus anymore. That sounds like pure good news. But it means those children grow into adults with no immunity, and hepatitis A is far more dangerous in adults than in the young. Better hygiene, in other words, quietly builds a growing pool of susceptible grown-ups, setting the stage for larger and more serious outbreaks. Scientists call it the sanitation paradox. There is an excellent vaccine, an inactivated shot licensed in the 1990s that gives long-lasting protection. But coverage is uneven, and the susceptible pool keeps growing. The outbreaks show what that means. Beyond the green onion event, the virus has ridden imported frozen berries and pomegranate arils across borders. Then, from 2016 onward, the United States suffered its largest person-to-person hepatitis A outbreaks in decades, with more than 44,000 cases and hundreds of deaths, concentrated among people experiencing homelessness and people who use drugs. Shellfish are a classic vehicle because oysters and clams filter seawater and concentrate the virus from sewage. In 1988, a single outbreak from contaminated clams in Shanghai infected roughly 300,000 people, one of the largest recorded outbreaks of its kind. Globally, hepatitis A still kills tens of thousands a year, and every flood that overwhelms a sewage system creates fresh risk. Mainstream science frames the modern threat as an immunity gap widened by patchy vaccine coverage. Social epidemiologists highlight how recent outbreaks concentrate among marginalized groups. A more speculative view points to climate change and failing sewage systems overwhelming shellfish beds. The irony sits at the center of it. Cleaner living has left modern adults defenseless against a virus that survives almost anything. And the final threat on our list aims at those who are not yet even born. Number 12. Rubella, also called German measles. In 1964, a pregnant woman notices a faint pink rash, so mild she barely mentions it. Months later, her baby is born blind and deaf, its heart malformed. The mother was never in danger. The child paid the entire price. That is the cruel logic of rubella, and it is why the possibility of its return is so quietly frightening. Rubella is caused by a virus that is the sole member of its genus, recently reclassified into a family called Matonaviridae. It earned the name German measles because German physicians described it in the 18th century, and the name rubella, Latin for little red, was coined in 1866. For most of history, it was dismissed as a trivial childhood rash. The danger was hidden, and it took a sharp-eyed doctor to see it. In 1941, the Australian ophthalmologist Norman Gregg noticed a wave of babies born with cataracts and traced it back to mothers who had caught rubella early in pregnancy. It was a landmark moment, the recognition that an infection could reach through the womb and reshape a developing child. The result is congenital rubella syndrome, which can cause deafness, blindness, heart defects, and intellectual disability. The scale of the danger became undeniable during the global rubella pandemic of 1962 to 1965. In the United States alone, it caused an estimated 12.5 million cases, thousands of fetal deaths, and around 20,000 babies born with congenital rubella syndrome. That catastrophe drove the rapid development of a vaccine, licensed in 1969, which became the third letter of the MMR shot. And it worked, spectacularly. The United States declared rubella eliminated, meaning no continuous local spread, in 2004. In 2015, the entire Americas region was declared free of endemic rubella, the first region in the world to achieve it. But hold on to that word, eliminated. It does not mean gone. It means held down by vaccination, and it survives only as long as coverage stays high, above a threshold of roughly 85 to 90%. That is the fragility at the center of the story. Rubella remains endemic across parts of Africa, the Middle East, and South Asia, where an estimated 100,000 babies are born with congenital rubella syndrome every year. And in the countries that eliminated it, falling MMR coverage, driven by hesitancy and by immunization disrupted during the COVID-19 pandemic, is widening the gaps the virus needs. Up to half of infections cause no obvious rash, so it can spread silently, and imported cases arrive constantly with unvaccinated travelers. Mainstream science stresses that elimination depends entirely on coverage. Epidemiologists worry about that silent, rashless spread. A more speculative view warns that a growing cohort of unvaccinated children could reignite endemic transmission. Rubella has no animal reservoir, so vaccination alone could, in principle, drive it to extinction. But it is gone from the Americas only as long as we keep vaccinating, and its victims are children who never had a choice. Line up all 12 of these diseases, and something clarifies. They are not returning at random. They come back through a small number of doors, and once you see the doors, the pattern is impossible to unsee. The first door is lost immunity. Mpox rises because we stopped vaccinating against smallpox and let the shield corrode. Mumps and rubella slip back as the protection from childhood shots fades or coverage falls. Hepatitis A finds a generation of adults left defenseless by the very cleanliness that was supposed to protect them. Public health scientists describe this as spending down the eradication dividend, and as the immunity debt that builds whenever a disease is held at bay, but not erased. The second door is antimicrobial resistance. Shigella and typhoid are ancient killers we genuinely tamed with antibiotics, and now they are climbing back up the ladder, defeating our drugs one class at a time. This is the slow-motion return of the pre-antibiotic era, arriving not with a bang, but with a quiet failure at the pharmacy counter. The third door is a changing planet. Scrub typhus, histoplasmosis, and leptospirosis are all expanding their range as the world warms, floods, and is cleared for farming. Warmer air lifts mites and fungi into new latitudes. Heavier rains hand waterborne bacteria more ground to cover. We are not just meeting these diseases, we are building them wider roads. The fourth door is the unfinished job. Yaws was scrubbed from 300 million people and came back because the campaign stopped early. The mad cow prion may still sit silently in thousands of carriers, incubating on a decades-long clock. Nearly finishing, again and again, turns out to be its own kind of danger. A warming, flooding, crowded, globally connected world lowers all four barriers at once. The oldest killers do not need to invent anything new. They only need us to look away. So, where does that leave us, standing between the deep past and whatever comes next, with a set of open questions that will decide how these stories end? We do not know how many people silently carry the variant Creutzfeldt-Jakob prion, or whether a slower second wave is still coming in people with a different genetic makeup. We do not know whether azithromycin-resistant yaws will derail eradication for a third time. We cannot yet say how far the ranges of scrub typhus, histoplasmosis, and leptospirosis will ultimately shift as the climate keeps changing. We do not know whether extensively drug-resistant Shigella and typhoid will become fully pan-resistant before the new vaccines can scale up to meet them. and we are watching closely to see whether Mpox finishes adapting to spread easily from person to person. Woven through all of it is a quieter problem: how much we simply miss. Scrub typhus hides behind dengue. Histoplasmosis is mistaken for tuberculosis and cancer. Leptospirosis wears the mask of malaria. The true burden of these diseases is blurred by the very diagnoses that resemble them, which means the return may already be further along than the numbers show. But the same science that names these threats also holds the tools to beat them. Conjugate vaccines are already blunting resistant typhoid. A single-dose cure could still finish Yaws. Genomic surveillance now catches new strains as they emerge, and plain sanitation remains the oldest and most powerful defense we have. None of these diseases is destiny. Each door that lets them back in is a door we know how to close. The deep past is not finished with us, and the record it left is a warning we are still learning to read. If the deep past still has questions for you, there's another investigation waiting on your screen right now, and subscribing keeps them coming.